Hello again and welcome to UMath. What do we have here? Well, this is a car, and it's actually a car that was designed by the famous Homer Simpson. And interestingly enough, it is called the Homer. I don't know if you can see that on there. It got Homer in a lot of trouble because it cost his relative his job at the car factory and made him broke. So, dope. Okay, the last lesson when we talked about the Pythagorean formula, we actually entered into a certain branch of geometry called trigonometry. And it's pretty easy to see when you look at the word why they call it trigonometry, because tri for triangle and the other part there of geometry. So you take these two words together to make trigonometry. So that's what we've actually entered into. So the last day we talked about the Pythagorean formula, and we learned terms like hypotenuse, the long side of a right-angled triangle, and the other two sides are just simply called the legs. The hypotenuse, once again, is the long side, and if you find the 90-degree angle, you just have to go straight across from it to find the hypotenuse. And our formula was c squared equals a squared plus b squared. And we said that the hypotenuse will always be c, and it doesn't really matter whether I call this a and this b, or I call this a and this b. But the c we can't mess up in any way. So what we looked at was when you were given the length of the legs, you could figure out what the length of the hypotenuse was using the Pythagorean formula. Today we're going to stay with the formula, and instead of giving you both measures for the legs, we're going to give you the measure of one leg and the hypotenuse, and then you'll have to figure out what the missing leg's length is. But the good thing is it's still the same formula, so that doesn't change. Just the way we do our calculations, there's a slight difference, but that's it. So let's give some numbers to the sides here. Let's call the hypotenuse 10 centimeters, and we will call one of the legs here, let's call it 8 centimeters. We now have enough information to figure out what the length of this leg is here. So we do what we've done all along. We employ the formula. We write down c squared equals a squared plus b squared. Always start with the formula. Then we begin to plug in numbers. Well, our c is 10, the hypotenuse, so we will put a 10 underneath the c, and we know that's squared. The a, we don't know what the a is, so we're just going to continue to write a, and it's squared. B, we do know what B is. We said it's 8, so we put an 8 underneath the B, and we know that that's squared. So now we just calculate. We do the exponents first, of course, before we do any addition. 10 squared, 10 times 10, it's 100. 8 times 8, 8 squared is 64. Now remember what we've done all along. To solve for a variable, you get the variable alone by doing the opposite. And the easiest thing to get rid of now, we have two things to get rid of. We have to get rid of this squared sign, and we have to get rid of this positive 64. So the easiest one would be to get rid of the 64 first. So we'd say subtract 64, that's the opposite. But we do it on both sides. So now these cancel out, and we're left with on this side just simply the a squared. And 100 minus 64 would give us 36. Now we're one step away. Get rid of the squared sign by doing the opposite, and the opposite of squaring something is doing the square root. So here comes the radical sign. on both sides. That cancels out the squared sign and we're left with the variable, and the square root of 36 is 6. And we must include the units. We were talking about centimeters. So what have we just figured out? We figured out that the length of this leg is 6. And if you look at the triangle, that makes sense when you look at the lengths of the other sides. If your question ends up with something like a equals the square root of 17, then it's not going to come out to a very even number. So what you need to do is either punch that into a calculator or use the square root chart in your workbook. And the question will probably have you round it to the nearest tenth. So you just have to look at the instructions for that. So questions for today to cross off for lesson 150 would be on page 352 in the chart. You can cross off 7 and 8. And on page 353 in sharpening skills, you can cross off the entire chart. And that'll be it.
That was easy.